Hello, this is Tomonori, your instructor for Japanese 101. Today I'm going to talk about chapter 3 of the textbook and especially about the verbs in Japanese. Okay, so the first thing you should know about Japanese verbs are there are 3 different types of verbs. First one is u verb, second ru verb, and the last one is irregular verb. Okay. From chapter 3, the u verb includes like nomu, kiku, hanasu, yomu, iku, and kaeru. Okay. From chapter 3, ru verbs include neru, okiru, taberu, and miru. And there are only 2 irregular verbs in Japanese. One is suru and kuru. The other one is kuru. Okay, so let's talk about the u verbs. Okay, all the u verbs listed here. Okay, they when you look at the verbs such as nomu, kiku, hanasu, yomu, iku, kaeru. Okay, so all of these verbs, if you look at the pronunciation, they always end with u. Nomu, kiku, hanasu, yomu, iku, kaeru. Okay, so that's why it's called the u verb. So these are u verbs, and the majority of Japanese verbs are u verb. So when you see a random verb, and if you want to make the best guess, most likely u verb is your correct answer. Do verb accounts for about 10%, 20% of the verbs. And then if you look at that, why it's called a do verb? Because they always end with ru. Neru, okiru, taberu, and miru. And that's why they are called do verbs. Okay. And then here, a little tricky point is sometimes some verbs end with ru, such as kaeru, can be u verb. Okay, so like kaeru, although it ends with ru, it's a u verb because ru also ends with u, right? So this makes possible that some verbs ending with ru be part of the u verbs, but they are a very small number. So usually the best guess is whenever you see like ru, neru, okiru, taberu, miru, your best guess is that they're ru verbs. Okay, some of them, such as kaeru, can be u verb, but most of the time they are ru verbs. Okay, so that's how you should remember. There are 2 irregular verbs, suru, which means to do. Kuru is to come. Okay, so these 2 verbs, it's like English. Actually, in English too, to do and to come, they are both irregular verbs. Like we say, do, did, done, instead of do, doed, right? So you don't use ed, or you don't say come, come. You say come, came, come. So in the same way, in Japanese, these 2 verbs behave somewhat strangely, somewhat unpredictably. So you have to just know that these two verbs are irregular verb. Tricky part of the suru is you can make lots of different verbs using suru. So for example, 勉強する, 勉強する, meaning to study, or テニスする, テニスする, meaning to play tennis, or ゴルフする, ゴルフする, to play golf, ゲームする, ゲームする, to play games. So there are lots of verbs you can create with suru. Okay, so whenever the new verbs is created with suru, they are all irregular verbs. So as long as you see suru at the end, you should presume that they are irregular verbs. So を勉強する, ゲームする, テニスする, they are all irregular verbs. So although there are only two, this one has a lots of siblings, so to speak. Okay. So, next thing we should talk about are two different forms. So in chapter 3, we talk about two different forms of Japanese verbs. The first form is called the dictionary form. Okay. Dictionary form is also called short form. Or sometimes called a plain form. The textbook uses this short form in their explanations. So when you see short form, they're talking about dictionary form. The polite form is also called the mass form, or long form. Okay. And the textbook uses long form instead of polite form. Okay, but they're basically the same thing. What's the difference? The difference is dictionary form or short form are the forms that you remember vocabulary. So let's say if you use the dictionary, if you look up a word in dictionary, the words are listed in this form, dictionary form. Okay. Usually the dictionary form is shorter. Actually, always dictionary form is shorter than polite form. Polite form is longer than short form. Okay. That's why it's called a short form as opposed to long form. Okay. Polite form is always longer than dictionary form. Plus, they always end with mas. Okay. That's why it's called the mas form too. So polite form is always ends with masu, and they are longer than dictionary form. What's the difference between them? So we just talked about the dictionary form is the form that you remember word. When do you use polite form? Polite form is used when you actually use it. So when you actually use a verb, in most cases, you use the polite form so that you can indicate some politeness. So instead of, for example, 食べる, to eat, instead of saying ピザを食べる, ピザを食べる, ピザを食べる is a little too plain or too simple, or doesn't express enough respect to the listener. So instead of saying ピザを食べる, we use ピザを食べます. Okay. The meaning is the same. We just have two different forms for to eat. One is 食べる and the other one is 食べます. Okay. So these are the two different forms. And here, you probably noticed that the very simple change happening here is る becomes ます. Okay. If it's a る verb, the only change you make is change る to ます. So for example, 寝ます or 起きます Oh, sorry. Not 起きます 寝る 起きる 見る So these are other lu verbs that we learned in this chapter. And for these, we just changed to ます So long form is 寝ます or 起きます and 見ます Okay, so lu verbs are much simpler to change from short form to long form. Verb and irregular verbs are a little bit difficult. Okay, so I want to go back to this thing. Okay, so we just said that all verbs end with u, such as no, mu, ki, ku, hana, su, yo, mu, i, ku, kae, ru. Okay, so all u verbs end with u sound. That's why it's called the u verbs. Somehow, when you add masu, so we want to say mas, we want to change to the long form from these dictionary forms. But somehow, when you add masu, the u sound doesn't like to be stay there. So what happens is u sound becomes I sound when you add mas. Okay. So for example, nomu becomes nomi. Kiku becomes kiki. Hanasu becomes hanashi. Yomu becomes yomi. Iku becomes iki. And kaeru becomes kaeri. Okay, so first we make this sound change. So u verb doesn't like to stay. They become I sound. And then add mas. So nomu, the long form is nomimasu. Kiku, long form is kikimasu. Hanasu, hanashimasu. Yomu, yomimasu. Iku, ikimasu. Kaeru, kaerimasu. Okay, so it's still the same process. You add masu, but somehow u verb hates to stay there, and you make sure that you change the sound to i instead. The irregular verbs, you just have to memorize this because they're irregular. There's no reason, no obvious reason why they behave this way. You just have to remember suru, long form is shimasu. Kuru, long form is kimasu. Okay. So for example, 勉強する, that's a short form. Long form is 勉強します. テニスする, テニスします. 勉強じゃない, ゲームする, ゲームします. And then 来る becomes 来ます. Okay, so that's a quick summary of Japanese verb conjugation. So I'm gonna present one more video about the verbs. I will talk about the particles, but for now, you just have to know different types of the verbs. Okay.